Hello, welcome to this lecture video. I'm teacher Melay, and today we will be talking about independent and dependent variables. So in our previous videos, we talk about the nature of variables or the nature of our data. So we were able to come up with quantitative data, qualitative data, and also the levels of measurements such as the nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So in the conducting experiment, for instance, so this is also one way for you to gather your data. So we also have what we call as independent variable and dependent variable. So this or the study that involves experiment or the studies that deals with cost and effect. So what is independent variable? So independent variable are sometimes called also as predictors. It is called as explanatory or exposure variable. And these are the variable that may affect the dependent variable. It is also the things or rather the variables that you change. So in conducting experiments, so there are variables that the researcher decides now what will be included in the study. Or there are also now variables that you think that might influence now your measurement, and these variables are called the independent variable. Okay, next. How about dependent variable? So what is a dependent variable? So these are the variables or variables being studied. It is the things that change. And of course, this is the variable that you intend to measure. And you think that this variable is also affected, as mentioned, by our independent variables. Okay, so to better understand the difference between independent and dependent variable, let us consider this following example. So let's have example number 1. So example number 1 has something to do with plant growth rate and amount of water, sunlight, and fertilizer. So in this example, let us have an experiment, a simple experiment that has something to do with the different types of fertilizers. Possible independent variables are the following. So we have the amount of water, sunlight, and fertilizers. These are the variables that we think might influence now the plant growth rate. However, we can actually just focus on one particular variable, like for instance, let's say the different types of fertilizers. So if we set the experiment wherein, let's consider the type of, aside from the mentioned amount of water, sunlight, fertilizer, we can also consider the type of plant. So let's say the plant is a sunflower plant. And then we will consider 3 experiment. We can also add type of soil used. So if we have 3 setups, so setup 1, setup 2, and setup 3, and all these plants now or sunflower seed, so if you started with a seed, so receive the same amount of water, the same amount of sunlight, and then you also use the same type of soil, and your objective is to see which of the fertilizers can increase the height of the sunflower in its maximum height. So, or with higher or longer stem. So you might want to consider that setup. So in that particular experiment, so you have, of course, for instance, the number of days. So you have to also consider that. So after, let's say, 45 days, after 2 months, so you do the same what do you call this? You give the same amount of water, you give the same amount of sunlight, and then you give also fertilizers to the plants, and then you will measure it at the end of 1 month or at the end of 2 months. So whichever is, of course, the expected growth of the plant. So in that example or in that experiment, fertilizer is the independent variable, and this type of fertilizer influence now the plant growth rate. However, if in another experiment, instead of using the fertilizer as your independent variable, you use sunlight as the independent variable. So you want to explore if the growth of the sunflower plant is better when it is placed in shade, when it is in direct sunlight, and if it is sometimes placed in a shaded part or in the direct sunlight, and all other possible cases. So if you will do that, and then you will give the same amount of water, the same fertilizer, so your independent variable is the sunlight. And of course, the dependent is just the same, it is the plant growth rate. Or if not, what if, for instance, you also want to know the type of soil? So, for instance, you have your mixture A, mixture B of soil, and mixture C of soil, and you want to know which of the soil is again better for the sunflower plant. So you again make the type of soil or the mixture of soil as your independent variable, and the dependent variable is the plant growth rate. Okay, let's consider another example. So example number 2. So for example number 2, we have here different types of disinfectants. And of course, since this is disinfectants, the objective is to eliminate or to decrease the growth of bacteria. So in the setup, wherein you consider now the different types of disinfectant, so this might influence the decreased or elimination of the growth of bacteria. So the dependent variable is the zone of inhibition or the measurement of the decrease in the growth of bacteria. While the dependent variable is the different types of disinfectant. So you want to know which among the disinfectant is the best disinfectant to use. Okay, so example number 3. So daily supplement to boost vitamin C in the body. So in doing this experiment, for example, you can make use of the sources of vitamin C as your independent variable, or if not, the different brands of vitamin C supplement can also be independent variable. And then the dependent variable would be, of course, the amount of vitamin C in the body. Okay, example number 4. So the effect of sex in the temperature of the mice. So in this experiment, so you want to know if the temperature of the mice, if it is male or female, is different or it has significant difference. So you are actually looking into the independent variable sex, and the dependent variable is the temperature. For our example number 5, so nitrogen content of the soil and the density of dandelion plants. So in this variables, so it can be that the nitrogen content of soil affects the density of the dandelion plants. So it can be that nitrogen content of soil is the independent, and the dependent variable is the density of dandelion plants. However, if you want to see now if the density of the dandelion plants also affects the nitrogen content of the soil, which means that if you have a separate experiment for that, then you are also looking into the possible effect of the density on the nitrogen content. So in that particular setup, the dependent variable is no longer the density but the nitrogen content of soil, and the independent is the density of dandelion plants. Okay, thank you for watching.